Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Indus Eagles Echoes Podcast, proudly presented by Indus International School, Hyderabad. I'm Sanyogita Bobba, and alongside me is Shreya Ramesh. Together, we'll be your hosts as we reconnect with our extraordinary alumni. In each episode of this podcast, we'll be exploring the journeys of our alumni, uncovering wisdoms and experiences they've gained during and since their time at Indus. Today, we're thrilled to take a look at Arya Dharod's life after flight from Indus's graduating class of 2023. Currently, Arya is looking to pursue his major in economics and psychology at Minerva University. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's truly an honor to have you here. I know that I've started with a very brief introduction, but if you could please talk a bit more about yourself.
Sure, and happy to be here. Thank you for reaching out. My name is Arya. I'm 18. I've I'm one of like the oldest Indus kids. So I joined in PP1 and I continued all the way to 12th. So a lot of like brand loyalty there. I'm currently based in Taipei, which I can talk a bit more about. And yeah, I go to Minerva, which is a new, I always struggle to describe Minerva, but it's like a very new, upcoming, innovative university that's focused on like travel and cultural immersion. And so we spend our 4 years in six global cities. So I had my entire first year in San Francisco, currently in Taipei. And so those are the first two cities. And then after that, as the semesters go on, we do Seoul, we do Buenos Aires, which is Argentina, we do Hyderabad, and we do Berlin. So those are our six cities. We spend about a year or a semester in each city. I guess that's a very brief intro of me and Minerva.
All right. So you talked a lot about Minerva University. What actually motivated you to choose it as a good school and a good fit for you?
Hmm. Yeah. Travel was a big one. I love traveling. I feel like a lot of learning, especially at university, happens outside of the classroom, which is something which I think you do and like whoever's listening will realize once they get into university is like maybe 30, 40% of your learning will happen in your classes and the lectures, and a lot more happens from what you do outside of class. So I wanted to have that experience of learning outside of class. The travel was a big one. That it gives you a lot of like soft skills which aren't as easy to put on a resume, but things like adaptability and being like very culturally aware, being flexible, things like that. So that was the big one. We, without going too in depth, the pedagogy, like the way they teach is very different. We don't do lectures. We do all discussion based classes. Classes are capped at 20 students versus like I know friends who go to universities where they sit in like a lecture hall with 200, 300 students. We do like 20 students in a class. The whole class is a discussion rather than a lecture, which I really enjoy. I feel like lecture is not the right way to be learning and consuming information. And number three is absolutely brilliant students. We have like 50 plus countries represented, students from all types of backgrounds and parts of the world. And that to me is very important, to be studying with people who come with a very different worldview than me. Because as I said, learning is outside of the classroom. So like a lot of the learning is happening just through day-to-day conversations with someone from like China and Pakistan and US and countries which you literally haven't even heard of, like Moldova and Kyrgyzstan, and Georgia.
So I know from what I know, Minerva University has a 1% acceptance rate, which is absolutely incredible for you to even be in that university. So I think we previously talked about how rigorous IBDP is before we started this podcast. Can you share a bit more about how you balanced your coursework with all the other, I guess, activities that you'd have to do to get into such a prestigious university, like internships or extracurriculars?
Yeah, DP is insane. You don't get a ton of time beyond DP to do extracurriculars. I know you both are in 11th, but if there's ninth and 10th graders listening to this, I think ninth and 10th are like wonderful times where you're not so academically burdened to be doing those extracurriculars. A lot of my writing happened in my ninth and 10th. Um, that's not to say that I didn't do anything else in DP. Couple of things. Um, I try to minimize time on revision by paying intense attention in class. And so I feel like most of my classmates, what the problem is, is they don't care as much about class. They're kind of like distracted, not so focused, and then they go back home and they revise. Versus I try to, I'm anyway in school for like 6 hours a day. So I try to like be focused, understand what's going on. And so I minimize my time on revision as much as I can because I understand what's going on in terms of the classroom. Um, Social media is something which is important to learn how to minimize, especially in these 2 years. That helped me a lot. I'm sort of off social media. So I do basic WhatsApp, Telegram, LinkedIn, but I'm off like Instagram and TikTok. Maybe that's extreme. But I think the best thing you can do for yourself is minimizing that. That'll save up a ton of time. Like you will not believe how much. And number three is your extracurricular should be something that you're very happy to wake up on a Sunday morning and do. So it's if I made you wake up on like a Sunday morning and I said like no Netflix, no going out, no friends, you have to do something work related. Like what would you be excited to do? For some people that's like math, for me that's writing, for someone else that's like maybe playing football. I would say it's important to drill down on those. Because in terms of extracurriculars, anything beyond the classroom is valuable. That could be sport, art, whatever. But whatever really is something you enjoy, which you can do late at night after a long day on a Sunday morning, that's what the extracurricular should be. So I guess those are a few tips and tricks in terms of balance and time management. But absolutely ninth and 10th is a great time to get those extracurriculars in. And then obviously 11th and 12th is the time to be focusing a bit more on academics and SAT, ACT, and a lot of the other things that go into college apps.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple of points about your writing, but from what I know, you're actually an econ and psych major. What
Hmm.
initially drew you to writing, and how did that evolve into an ecology and economics and psychology major?
Hmm. There's two parts to the question. What drew me to writing was just a natural flair, a natural passion. I really can't explain it very logically. English used to be the favorite subject in school, all through my education. Started small, started with like quotes and poems and short stories. And I can go very deep into this, but like to keep it brief because this is not the focus of the episode. Um, what was going to be a short story turned out to become a full-length 60-page novel, which turned out to be my first book, Clumsy Diaries. And it just sort of never stopped after that, after the first book. That's how that journey was. Why I'm doing economics and psychology is I think writing will always be like a deep hobby and a passion for me. And I'm scared about losing that passion by studying it formally through like doing a literature major in college. And so there's people like that who are very artistic, but just don't want to do it in college because they don't want to like formally study it. They just enjoy doing it on a Sunday morning. I'm one of those people. So I don't want to like formally get into literature and like writing in terms of a formal class. I don't want to like be graded on on like the things I write for an assignment or an exam. Um, and why I'm doing economics and psychology is I'm approaching it more from the skill set point of view. I'm not sure what I'm going to do after graduation. Economics gives me a good skill set in terms of quantitative reasoning, working with numbers and data, understanding the models and theories behind what's going on, which I think is a good skill set. And psychology is helpful for my writing, for my content creation, and beyond. I feel like any sort of work I'm doing, the ability to like better understand why people do what they do, what's going on behind their behavior or someone's mood. I feel like even beyond my profession is useful for just dealing with humans in life. I see myself dealing with a lot of humans, whatever I choose to be doing as a career. So that's economics plus psychology, but like I have a different approach, which is like I don't approach it in terms of like, okay, economics plus psychology, this is the job. I approach it more from like a skill set point of view. Like what kind of skills do I want to have? That's how I choose my majors, and then like we'll think about the job when I have more clarity in life. I don't know when that'll be.
I want to go back to your writing part that you were talking about. So, especially the kids that have been to Indus for a while. I know me and Shreya, we've had the opportunity to read your books and actually see your writing journey, right? So, for the kids that you've inspired to start writing, do you have any advice for them or any resources that are either online or that you can provide for them, especially in these 4 years, 9 to 12? Because that's, I think, the major time that we do things like this.
Hmm. First thing I would love to say is if anyone's working on a book, and especially if anyone has a first draft ready, please feel free to reach out. I'm very, very happy to help. I don't know if there's a way to put like contact info in the episode description,
You will.
but please do reach out. I'm happy to help. I didn't have anyone like that as like a writer who I could reach out to for advice. I'm hoping I can be that for someone. Make use of your English teachers. I don't know who's there and who's left, but I had beautiful English teachers back in school. And right from the idea to the writing to the editing, my English teachers were involved throughout the process. They have a much better grasp on the language and the grammar and the vocab, which a lot of writing is about. Please make use of them as a resource. I'm sure they'd be more than happy, at least the people who are coming to my mind right now. It's tough to give advice. It's consistency is very important, I guess, is the last thing I'll say. Is one of my friends. So I kind of for me it's like a bragging point. I've published 3 books. And I have a friend here at Minerva who's published 9 books. And so I was like, wow, like someone's done that at 19 years old. I kind of rethought whether I had the bragging rights. How she does it is for the last 4 years, she has written every single night for at least 30 minutes, regardless of whether she wanted to write or not. So it's kind of like to go into the gym, where it's like the days you don't want to do it are the days that it's more important to go in terms of willpower building. Consistency is important. Um, and you could spend an entire night just writing trash, but writing it is important. And so if someone is working on a book, mid-book burnout is probably the one thing I've seen most authors like struggling with. Like people who couldn't get to the publication stage who were working on a great book was just like mid-book, they just got burnt out and tired. So consistency is just very important in terms of having a habit and having, for people who are more planned, planning is helpful. So you know when the book ends. So like if you know that, okay, approximately I'm going to have these many chapters and this is the plot, you kind of have a sense of like, okay, I'm almost at the end of this book. That helps me versus like having no idea when the book is going to end, which means it could like take forever. Those are a few things. It's very subjective and very difficult, but I mean, hopefully like few of those things are helpful.
While we're on the topic of advice, something you said, I think a couple of minutes ago, that you don't have any clarity about what exactly you're doing right now is so comforting because, like myself, I know there's so many kids who are so indecisive about what they want to do and they're struggling. They're struggling to grasp, oh, what should I take in IB? What am I going to write in my college essay? Do you have any advice for them? And I would love to hear it because we're in the same boat.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's such a myth that like you need to have your life figured out at like 18, 19, second year of college. You need to be knowing what you're going to be doing like 5 years down the line. I know alumni who are working and still don't know exactly what they're doing and they're still figuring things out. Like it's very much a process. New experiences will teach you a lot of things. Couple of pieces of advice. I've thought about this quite a bit. I've talked to people about this quite a bit. Um, One is please go and read the book Ikigai. I think it would be very helpful. I don't exactly remember, but sort of these 4 Venn diagram. Like one is like what would make what would give you financial abundance? What do you enjoy? What does the world need? And there's maybe one more piece I'm missing there. But there's a very nice Venn diagram. I feel like if you sit through and do the exercise and you write down your answers, that should give you a decent amount of clarity, if not a specific answer. That's one. Two is like get out of the classroom and start building projects. Like if you like computer science, go and like write code and build something. If you think you want to be an author, go and like write a short story collection or a poetry collection or a book. If you think you're into economics, it, go and do research with someone in the industry or go and do an economics internship. As much work experience as you can get will give you an idea of what you'd of ideally what you see yourself doing, because there's also such a big difference between theoretically enjoying studying economics versus actually working in the field. Like I've had people who love studying it and don't enjoy working in the field, and then like that's why they had to switch majors, because you're going to be working in the field. That's another one. Number 3 is talk to people older than yourself. Could be college students, could be alumni who are doing majors which you think are interesting, which you see yourself doing, and really grill them about like, what do you enjoy about studying XYZ? Let's take economics. What do you enjoy about studying economics? What do you not enjoy about studying economics? What are interesting career options after doing economics? Third one is important because I feel like for the longest time, I was like, okay, someone doing a psychology major, they're going to go into like counseling or therapy. And then I was speaking to a friend on my podcast, um, who is again is an Indus alumni. I think it would be cool to have her. But she told me like 15 different career paths that you can do with a psychology major, half of which I didn't even know about. So be aware of like with a certain major, what can you be doing after? Um, those are a couple of helpful points. Again, very subjective, very one-on-one. Always helpful to talk this through with like parents, teachers, counselors, brothers and sisters, people older than yourself. Um, that's always the most helpful.
I'm really glad that you brought up that last point because I feel like that kind of summarizes the goal of this podcast, or at least one of them, which is to help Indus students or students in general just to learn from people who have gone through the experiences that they have already, they are going to go through. So I have one question. I remember talking about a gap year, I think yesterday. So you said that you were thinking about taking a gap year, but you ended up deciding not to. Can you walk us through that? Was that so you could experience more, like you said, before you go into college? Was there anything else behind that?
Hmm. I should have taken a gap year. That's probably a regret I have. And I'll start with like a bit of background here. I think that our society is not yet so comfortable with the concept of gap years. I have friends who come from the Netherlands where it's very common to take 2 or 3 gap years and then go to college. So I feel like our society is also progressing slowly in that direction, and parents and teachers are realizing that someone didn't take a gap year because they like failed 12th grade or they didn't get into any university. It's for personal growth and development and then going to university. Um, Taking a gap year looks so different for so many people. The reason I wanted to take one was I had been studying for like 16 years of my life. And I think I wanted a break from that. I wanted to get out of the classroom and have some real world experiences and then go into university. Because when you go into university, you will realize that not everyone comes at it as an 18-year-old who just finished high school 3 months ago. A lot of people are like transfer students or they've taken multiple gap years. Some people even have work experience and then come into undergrad because they just feel like they lack certain skills. And so again, this is coming back to what I was talking about in terms of outside the classroom learning. Your interactions will be richer when you have more life experiences. Your interactions with your classmates, your professors, being able to say, yeah, I did this internship, I went to Norway and I did this XYZ volunteering, whatever. That's what makes your conversations more fruitful. And so my gap year would have just been like experiences, and that would have been like courses, travel, internships, personal projects, connecting with people, also taking time off, which is important, working on college apps with more time, otherwise it gets squeezed into 12th grade. But just being someone who can talk about more things, who has done more in life. Here I have at my university, I have people who have like done a couple gap years, served in the military of their country, for example, Israel, and then come and they're like 24, 25. I have someone who dropped out of UC Berkeley, worked for like 5 years, and then came back to college, and he's now 27. So he's like 10 years older than me. And they have so much to talk about in the classroom, outside the classroom, at a networking event, versus I have some interesting projects, but I have much less to talk about in terms of lived experiences. Like, who am I? I'm a university student studying XYZ. Who is the other person I'm talking about? He's like, he has worked in 2, 3 different industries. He has traveled the world. He has so much more to share. So who should take a gap year? Someone who's not clear about like major university, country, overall what they want to do in life. If they just want time to reflect and get clarity, take a gap year. If you just want to be a more interesting person before college, if you understand the value of that, take a gap year. If you're building any sort of a cool project, like let's say tomorrow this podcast explodes and you like it becomes very successful and you feel like, okay, I want more time to like build this podcast up and have a solid project before, like I'm sure I'm going to go to university, but after a year. um, I have people who are building amazing startups, don't want to take a break, build the startup for 2, 3 years and then go back to university. Of course, some don't go to university. Um, so that's there's so much to say, but like that's a very condensed version of like what is a gap year and what you can do and who should take one.
I have a follow-up question on that. I think there's this really common question for students, especially, that if I take a gap year, will that affect my chances of getting into university? Or if I take a gap year, will I be able to get the opportunities that I'm looking for, right? Because I'm just a high school student. I don't have a college degree. I don't have any,
Hmm.
you get what I'm trying to say here?
It's a complicated answer. I didn't take a gap year, so I don't 100% know. I was talking to like the school counselors about this. colleges are perfectly happy with you if you're taking a gap year, but they don't want to see that you wasted time. Because you had a gap year, because you had the whole day on your hands, you had like so much time, they want to see that you've made use of the time. But honestly, from a college perspective, they don't care very much whether you come into their college at like 18 or 20 or 35. Like they just want someone who's intelligent and bright and will add value to their community, which probably someone who's taking a gap year will add more value to the community versus someone who hasn't if they've used the gap year well. So short answer, if you use the gap year very well, if you have significant tangible things to show out of the gap year, won't affect your chances. I'd argue they improve your chances. They probably give you those 10 amazing extracurriculars which every college is looking for, which you might not have time to like do in 9, 10, 11, 12. Part two, opportunities. That's a difficult question. And it's so interesting. I guess I could talk for a moment about US versus Indian culture. In San Francisco, I met so many people who were college dropouts or never went to college are now working in big tech, like Google, Apple, Amazon, whatever. And no one cares that they didn't go to college. Someone they're working alongside someone who like graduated from Harvard, and the Harvard student like doesn't care. If you have the skills, if you're intelligent, if you can network, you can get stuff done, they do not care. Versus our society is a lot more about, okay, where did you go to college? Where did you go to school? What did you study? Um, that's a big cultural difference. But I prefer the San Francisco culture. And so what can we do as students is I think change our approach. So let's say tomorrow you take a gap year, you want to ask like some professor at University of Hyderabad who's doing bio research, I want to do bio research under you. Approaching them not from like, I'm a 17-year-old high schooler who wants to do bio research under you. That's a very like cute, okay, if they're feeling charitable, they'll give it to you. Otherwise, no, like don't waste my time. Versus like leave the student, like don't pitch yourself as a student. That's the advice I get also, is don't say you're a college student, forget that. People will immediately take you less seriously. Talk about the work you've done. And so like I've studied in-depth biology. I do this like biology podcast. I've read a few of your papers. These are specific questions I have about the research you do. That is how you should be reaching out to people for any sort of an opportunity. That applies for like internships. If you want to just network with someone, have a coffee chat. If you want to work for someone or work under someone, do research. That is how you approach. Is you do the work. You don't tell them you're a student. You don't tell them your age. You just tell them that this is specifically what I've looked into or what I'm curious about, what I want to work on. This is some of my past projects. This is my portfolio. I would love to work under you. Let's talk further. Like that's how people will take you more seriously. Leave aside like I'm a student and I just finished 12 and like that's like very cute. So as I said, yeah, I think that's I guess to wrap up, what I'm saying is, let's say tomorrow I go to a networking event in Taipei or in San Francisco, wherever, and like I ask the other person, okay, what do you do for work? And they're like 35 years old and they tell me like I work for this company and do XYZ. And then they ask me, okay, what about you? Never will I say like I'm a university student, I'm doing XYZ, I'm 18 years old. No, no, no. I begin with like, okay, I'm a content creator, I'm a writer, I'm a podcaster. This is what I'm working on. And then specifically that person, like, okay, I've read up about the company you work for. This is a specific question I have about the work you do. And that's how like the conversation goes. So they take me also more seriously than versus if I say, yeah, I'm a college student, I do economics and psychology. I'm just here to like ask you some questions. Um, that's the distinction, which is like I was never told this in school. I was told this at university by my friends who have more experience than me. I wish more high schoolers knew this. Even when you're asking for opportunities tomorrow and for an internship, not saying that you're like some high schooler who just wants it from charity. Like you deserve the opportunity because you have like experience and work and you're smart and curious and passionate. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. Actually, I'm also applying for an internship or to work under Dr. Reddy, who works in Hyderabad University under his biology program.
Hmm.
I think I'll definitely take your suggestions because, yeah, I think he will take me more seriously. Thank you so
Awesome.
much. Yeah, but I want to go back to the first thing you said. You regret taking a gap year. I know regrets are something that drive us crazy as students. We
Hmm.
always think, we always look back and we say, huh, what would happen if I did do this? So, other than the fact that you didn't take a gap year, are there any other challenges or regrets that you feel would have, I don't know, helped you build your profile better or just help you more develop more as a person, anything like that?
Two things. One, I should have used my summers better, like ninth grade summer, 10th grade summer, 11th grade summer. I was mostly chilling, maybe doing a few projects. That's like 2 months of quality time on your hand to do internships or work or extracurriculars or whatever. I should have used those better, primarily to get some work experience because I came into college with very, very limited work experience. Like I had cool projects, but I had not done any sort of like formal internships or been in a company before. And so that is making it difficult for me today to get work experience. Um, and number two, I should have spent this is going to be kind of controversial. I'm not sure how happy your teachers will be to hear this, but I should have spent less time studying and been okay with like so I had a 43 predicted grade. I should have been okay. I should have been okay with more like a 38, 39. And the reason I'm saying that is because the time I would save on those 4 or 5 points on that amount of like crazy studying I was doing in IB, I should have invested into myself. Because today, no one at college cares or even asks that I got a 43 PG and I got like a 40 final grade. Like no one cares. We have 45s here. Um, that's even if someone asked, it's just like one question. Okay, Arya, how much did you get in your IB? People are curious about the work you've done and the people you've met and the projects you've built and the connections you have in terms of your network. Like I had zero network going into college. Now I have to start building it up. So if I had one piece of advice is don't be again, I'm not sure how happy your teachers will be to hear this, but I very strongly believe this. A big regret is like don't try and top the class. Don't try and be like the 43, 44, 45 student. Have a cutoff. That cutoff can be 40 for you. But I would say even if it's an Ivy League, I think they would be more happy with like a 40 on 45 student who has amazing extracurriculars and amazing essays and is a beautiful person who will add value to their community versus like a 45 student who has like very average extracurriculars and hasn't done much because they were just studying all the time to get the 45. So like never underestimate the amount of time it takes to jump from like a 5 to a 6 and a 6 to a 7. This is also from a college point of view. This is an application point of view. Even if you're aiming for the Ivy Leagues, this is US focused. I will say FYI. I think UK, Canada, the other countries are more just into grades. So if you're going for those countries, just go for grades. Specifically, US students, um, get 1 or 2 points less in your IB and have amazing projects and extracurriculars and build on that. And if you want to follow up, I'm happy to talk through this more. This might be like an opinion which you've never heard before.
Um, Focusing on your last point that you made, the grades and the extracurriculars, personally, I think that depends a lot on the country that you're deciding to go to, right? Because I know a friend of mine that's going to LSE now, and she had to get a 7 in her HL
Hmm.
physics. Otherwise, she would have been taken out of her college. She would have been removed from the college essentially, and then she would have to start all over again her college admissions. And then in US, I know someone that had a 45 predicted and ended up getting a 40, but he had such good extracurriculars that he got into Harvey Mudd. Um,
Hmm.
so how did you decide what country you were going to go to, and how did you prepare yourself for that from school itself? Either if you're focusing on grades or you're focusing on extracurriculars, were you focused or did it just end up happening?
Hmm. That's a good call out. For whatever I said, as I said when I was answering, that applies, I think, probably only to the US. Every other country, you probably will just have to work on grades. But I think what I said applies well to the US. I just, again, thank you for calling that out. In terms of the country, that's a big decision, right? I had friends who applied to multiple countries. I was primarily, like, I think I was only applying to American universities. Why? Because I'm a big believer in like I want to be studying with interesting people beyond just people who are academically smart. And I feel like the US filters for that. Let's say you're going to a UK university, maybe you have tons of like let's say you're going to an LSE, maybe you have tons of academically smart people. Extracurriculars also I'm sure are amazing. But they're not filtering for that as much. Like their primary thing is have you gotten good grades in the IB? Whereas I think in the US, it's about who you are very well rounded in terms of essays and grades and extracurriculars. And so even at Minerva, the reason I chose was because I wanted to study with people who are not just academically brilliant. Like I have friends who are very average all through school, but who have done amazing things beyond school. That's why I chose the US. I think in terms of that, in terms of just diversity and exposure, primarily in terms of people, like in terms of different nationalities, and different backgrounds, I feel like the US is one of the best countries in the world versus others who have great academic institutions as well. So it's important to think through what do you want from college and what do you want from your peers? Do you want people who are very academically brilliant? Okay, maybe like that, then you go to like maybe an IIT or a UK or a Canada. Versus, I think for the US, the big pull factor is like diversity and exposure, if that's like the two words to summarize it. I was very clear on the US, and so as I said, from the moment like nine started, I was very clear in my cutoff for my 10th was anything above 50 and I'm happy. I don't care if it's a 50 or a 56. And the same for IBDP. Anything above like a 39, I'm happy. I don't care if it's a 40 or a 45. If it's a 45, I'll probably spend less time studying to get it down to like 1 or 2 days less. So I can save that time and like build extracurriculars. So I was as much as I could while getting decent grades, minimizing time on studying, building projects and doing extracurriculars to prepare for the US university application. Um, I think that was the main focus. For the US specifically, the balance is very important between academics and extracurriculars versus my friends were just caring about like studying, getting amazing grades. We're happy. We're getting into like a good Canadian UK school. So if you can have clarity as early as possible, ideally like at least midway through 11th, that'll really help you like narrow down in terms of what am I optimizing for in like 11th and 12th.
Yeah, Arya, I'm also thinking about applying to US colleges, and I think what you said had made me realize that I better rethink how I'm gonna go through these entire 2 years. Thank you so much. That was actually really, really helpful. Now, I want to jump back a few steps and talk specifically about Minerva. Everyone who I ask, hey, where do you want to go to college, specifically the US, says Harvard, Yale, Princeton, NYU, Berkeley, the most common colleges you can think of. Minerva, although highly rigorous, like a 1% acceptance rate, oh my God, not many people know about it, right? I think you've told me that only you were the first Indus student who went to Minerva, and one junior from Indus Pune is joining you there. How did you hear about Minerva, and what would you tell the people of Indus? Like, is Minerva good for them? Like, please join us, and anything that comes to your mind.
Yeah, short. I heard about Minerva through another program I was doing in high school. That was the STEM program, but that program had a bunch of people who were interested in Minerva. And so I spoke to them and they were like, okay, this new innovative university, 7 countries. So I was like immediately curious. Went to the website and checked it out. What helped me was Minerva has a rotation city in Hyderabad. So for everyone who's in Hyderabad, potentially you might have Minerva students studying in Hyderabad. And so I'm sure there's a way, even I can help connect, but I'm sure there's a way to reach out to them physically. So a big part of like my convincing factor for me and my parents with going to like such a new, unknown, young university was having my parents physically meet the Minerva students when they were in Hyderabad and have that conversation. I was very impressed by the Minerva students. Many of them were just 2 or 3 years older than me, but in terms of life experience and like social emotional maturity, they were easily 5, 6 years older than me. And so I was like, I want to have that kind of an exponential growth in college, particularly in terms of like social and emotional maturity and like life experience alongside the academics. Who should apply to Minerva and consider Minerva? If you're kind of if you don't think you want to like have a traditional university experience, if you're willing to take a risk, be bold, be unconventional, if the travel excites you, I think Minerva is a decent fit. If you're again a strong believer in like this whole like the lecture model is not the best way to teach and you're interested in the pedagogy and the way they teach, I feel like again Minerva is interesting. Those are probably the two big ones. If the travel excites you, if the pedagogy excites you, and if you need to like take a risk and step outside of your comfort zone, go to a university which not many people know of. Who should not apply to Minerva? The opposite. If you want a comfortable, traditional, safe, prestigious university experience, like don't come to Minerva, it's not for you. If travel is like tiring for you or you don't see the point of like, okay, I don't see why we're going to 7 cities, don't come. And Minerva is also, this is just a heads up, but Minerva is good for certain majors, not great for certain majors. So just because the small school in terms of resources, like labs or even like niche majors, like if someone wants to do film or someone wants to like specifically AI, we just don't have niche majors like that because it's a small school. So don't come to Minerva if you're doing specific niche majors or if a lab is very important to you, especially for like the natural science students, don't come. That's yeah, very brief. Minerva, who should come, who shouldn't come.
I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong about this, but could I say that one of the reasons why Minerva is not as well known as universities such as Harvard that have lower acceptance rate, I mean, higher acceptance rates, could it be that it's so incredibly hard to get in? And also, it's for a very niche group of students, and you have to work very hard towards a specific agenda to get in?
Yes, sort of. The age is a factor. I don't know how old Harvard is, but I'm sure it's like at least 100 years old. Minerva is like a decade old. So that's a factor. We just have less graduating classes. Very small university, and so you'll also notice that like probably if you go to a person on the street, there's a much higher chance they know of like a Harvard or a Berkeley or NYU versus like a Harvey Mudd or a Swarthmore or a Pomona or a CMC. Again, that's a factor of the size of the university. We are a sorry.
Sorry. I mean, the reason that I asked that question was this was a very recent experience of mine. So I was talking to one of my mom's friends. He's a professor at Stanford, and he also helps with the admission process. And he was telling me that he didn't feel qualified enough to judge the kids that were applying because they were doing so many different things, like things that he never did at that age, whether you were talking about startups or internships when you're still teenagers, right? So how can we even achieve those things, if you get what I mean? How can we find the resources and even know about them? Because I'm sure that kids that would love to go to a university like Minerva solely aren't applying because they don't know that it exists. So do you have any advice on how to make sure we know what's going on around us so we don't miss opportunities? Any resources, websites, people, anything like that?
Hmm. That's an interesting question. I think everything is available online. What's important is being very clear on what you want out of your university. That's very important because that will heavily influence your choice. If you're going to university for a fancy name and like studying all the time and getting great grades, then maybe there's a certain university. If you're going to university for networking and to like have an amazing network and like always be around intelligent people, maybe that's a different choice. Something like a Minerva, if you're going for a very unconventional experience, you want to like travel the world, have more lived experience, um, do something out of the box, then maybe it's like time to consider that. So I think answering that question gives you clarity. So for example, what I was doing when I was like researching was I was looking for traveling university. Like I specifically went on Google and said, what are universities that like travel over the 4 years? So like for example, SP Jain goes to like Dubai, Singapore, and then I think Sydney or London. That was of interest to me. So I was looking for traveling universities. Versus if someone's looking for smaller universities, then you go and then you find like, okay, there are these 20 amazing liberal arts colleges that no one ever told me about. So it's a factor of like what you're looking for in the university. If you're looking for a specific major, a specific program, maybe again, an Ivy League doesn't have that program. You go to a more niche university for a very niche major. Um, but yeah, it's very subjective. There's no one good answer. Being clear on like what kind of a university you're looking for, what you want to get out of it, will probably inform the search. And then it's about like reaching out to people and going online. Yeah, it's a difficult question.
Yeah, it was a difficult question. I really like the way Sanyogita framed it. One thing that stood out to me was she said so many kids are doing so many exceptional things today. Like I was watching an episode of Shark Tank. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And there was this 8-year-old who so innovative. She developed this spoon for babies. It's called Baby Tune. That was so inspiring. And you are no exception. I know you have a podcast that is very, very similar to ours. Would you like to talk about it a little bit? Just share what it's about, why people should listen to it, the content, anything about it.
For sure. And there's a ton of overlap. So I'd be super grateful if you could even drop a link in the episode. I feel like our target audience is like very overlapping. It's very similar to your podcast. In fact, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like I feel like I wish when I was in high school, someone told me the things which I now know at university. Like someone told me about things like experience over grades, or like how to network, how to get an internship, how to present myself. Um, and as a high schooler, I'm just an overthinker and a very worried person, but I was anxious about every aspect of college life. I was anxious about like how do you make friends? What are parties like in college? What's the dorm situation like? TAs, office hours, connecting with a professor, research, internships. Like I could go on and on. But I was very curious about the entire college experience. And so what I did was I put in the pain and like reached out to people and friends on LinkedIn and through personal connections who were currently at universities I was interested in. Just had a one-on-one chat with them. And then I was like, wow, like I mean, I learned a lot. I want to create a resource that is helpful for high schoolers like yourself. So the podcast is basically a series of deep conversations, much longer than your episodes. Like our episodes are between an hour and a half. So just talking to current students and alumni at some of the top universities across countries and across majors about just the authentic university experience. And so we start from applications because that's obviously what's probably high top priority on the mind right now. We talk about applications, we talk about tips and tricks, we bust common myths, we talk through how to finalize your country, how to finalize your major, how to choose. Let's say you get into like tomorrow I get into two amazing universities. Like I get into UC Berkeley and NYU. How do I approach making the choice? Um, and then we segue into like just authentic university life, everything. Like I've talked about homesickness, I've talked about imposter syndrome, I've talked about things like internships, office hours, research with professors, both very emotional and also very like factual and more logical things. But that's and the aim of the podcast is to be a very comprehensive database. I recorded a lot of episodes over summer. I hope to keep recording more, and just collecting experiences of students and students and students, and just talking through the experience. I think there's a market need for this, and I don't think many great resources like with a similar mission and vision exist online. And I guess, yeah, very briefly, that's the point of the podcast.
I want to go back to one specific sentence that you said. It was about feeling inferior in college, if I'm not wrong. So
Yeah.
I feel like the students that do really good in school or care enough to put in the effort to go into a really good college like you have, you're surrounded by kids that have also done the exact same thing. So no longer are you the best of your batch. How do you deal with that? Have you ever felt like dropping out because of it? Because I do know some people who have dropped out of college because it was too much pressure and it was something that they haven't experienced in their lives before.
This might also apply to what's going on in school, in terms of maybe you have classmates getting better grades than you, or doing internships, or getting a better SAT than you. What really helps, I struggled with this a lot through my first year. I think I'm struggling less with it this year, is, and why I think that is because I have gotten more clarity about the direction in which I'm heading, especially after graduation. And so being very clear, even that's a very vague idea of like, this is what I want after graduation, that makes a big difference because tomorrow when someone tells me I got a big tech internship at like Microsoft or Google or Apple, instead of feeling like, oh my God, I'm inferior and like this person has this, I don't even have an internship, is like, okay, cool. This person wants to become a software engineer in big tech. That's not my path. Like my path is something entirely different. So why am I even comparing myself to them? Um, or if someone tomorrow tells me like I'm taking XYZ major and that's like the hardest major at Minerva versus I'm taking an easier class. Again, I can feel inferior and be like, okay, this guy has a much higher course load than me in terms of intensity. But again, maybe I'm at Minerva for like having lighter course load and doing other things beyond. So the more clarity you can have on like generally where am I going, it immediately becomes very obvious to you that it's very dumb to be comparing with like someone else who's on a completely different path. If I'm going in like this direction and you're going in this direction, if you walk 10 steps in that direction, I don't really mind because I'm walking 10 steps in an opposite direction than you. So that is very important. And then again, this is like much easier said than done. And this is generally a learning curve. Me saying it might not help, but the way you overcome imposter syndrome is more of slowly but surely realizing that there's no point in just comparing and like being dejected. That's not serving you in any way. It's just making you upset, and shifting to an attitude of like being inspired. Like, oh my God, this person runs a startup at university. This person does a triple major and is getting all A's. This person goes to a networking event every other day. I'm inspired. I want to talk to this person and ask them how they do it. And I think on a bright side, what you will realize at university is most people, either for their egoistic self, because we all love talking about ourselves, or from a charitable point of view, are more than happy to talk through what they're doing and how they're doing it. Like I'm happy to talk about this on the episode today. And so it's like anyone who you are a little intimidated but also inspired by, boom, immediately go and set up a chat with the person, take half an hour or an hour of their day, and just ask them, like, be honest, like, I'm inspired by the work you do. I don't, how do you have so much time to all of this? They'll give you an answer. How do you achieve X, Y, and Z at such a young age? They'll give you an answer. And then piecing together the answers of multiple people, you'll also learn a lot. What you learn at college is like everyone knows something that you don't. And so like approaching every interaction, this might even be true of high school. I think it's more true in college. Like approaching every interaction, every friend and every classmate with like, I have something I can learn from this person. I have something I can learn from that person. Um, Being in a learning mode versus like a comparing mode. If I had like put it on an abstract mindset level, is what I would say.
So, I'm really interested in biology as a major for my college, but I'm not sure. Somewhere around the sciences. That's why I've taken all three. And right now, my
Wow.
extracurriculars are piano, scuba diving, football, athletics, swimming. I think what I'm doing at this point is I'm just trying to get as many extracurriculars as I can, but there's no point in them really. A college is not going to say, oh, she's average at all these things. So, what advice do you have to kids, or what can you tell students our age about extracurriculars? Is there any specificity in them, or can you be generic about them? Do colleges look for something focused or general, anything like that?
Yeah, I love talking about extracurriculars. So I want to preface all of this by saying that I don't know how the backside of this works. So take all of this with like a grain of salt. I have not looked into any sort of like deeply into like how you are evaluated. This is whatever limited knowledge I have or like I've spoken to my friends about. But the thoughts I have are there's an interesting balance between depth and breadth for extracurriculars. Ideally, you have both. You have like a good number and they're all deep. If which is a very ideal situation. Let's say you're short on time or resources or whatever. I would have like some breadth, three or four, but I would rather see someone doing like three or four interesting deep projects versus like 10 very average projects. Like that is personally what I think is more powerful for a university as a story to tell. That's number one. Number two is, as I was saying, as much as you can build and like metaphorically get your hands dirty. And so let's say I'm running with the biology example you're taking. Like you love biology. Cool. You said you're not super sure about wanting to do it in college. Like get your hands dirty. Reach out to biology professors. Work with them. Do research under them. I think you'd be surprised that like again, I'm totally not an expert here, but like you don't always need like a lab to be doing biological research. You can also be collaborating online and helping professors with XYZ, whatever. I won't go into like something I don't know there. Reach out to professors, do research. Content creation is always very, very high leverage. Whatever topics, like how you're doing this podcast, whatever topics you're passionate about, for you that could be biology, like start creating content because that is something you can physically go and show to your university. Like I have a podcast about biology, or I have written 10 blogs about like CRISPR or whatever. Create
CRISPR,
content on topics you're
yeah.
passionate about and you enjoy, especially if major specific content is always a plus. So let's say it's economics, like write articles, record videos, put them up online, do podcasts with people into the field. That's always very high leverage. Um, and overall, just building projects. Biology specifically is more difficult for me because I have very limited background or knowledge there. But I'm sure there's all kinds of interesting projects you can be building if you just go online, read an article or watch a video, replicating projects or building your own things. I'm sure that can always be very high value. Let's talk a bit about the extracurriculars you mentioned. So you said athletics and piano and swimming and a bunch there.
I'm
Um,
trying to grab them all and go so in deep so I have a good chance of getting to college.
so I love that. I think what it's so let's say you're doing athletics, you're participating in competitions, same for swimming. In piano, you're doing like Trinity or Rock School or whatever, you're getting certain grades in. Awesome. If you can, like if you feel very passionate about even one of those, I think there's always a next level. And the next level is always creation. And so let's say that's athletics or swimming. Maybe we can couple that with like a volunteering aspect and like go and like teach athletics or swimming to like kids at some
I've
XYZ school.
actually done that for my personal project in the 10th grade. That was me teaching young girls football. Yeah, it was
Awesome.
amazing. Yeah.
So That's why you can combine and like kill two birds with one stone. So like let's say your thing, you've got the football and the athletics element, and you've also got the service element. That is awesome. Like they're seeing two things at once. Um,
I
Piano
want
is very interesting. Why?
I
Go
just
ahead.
want to interrupt here because when you're talking about combining two things at once, I just have an example that I'd like to give. You can comment on it and tell me if
Go.
it works or not. But currently, my college counselor actually told me this, but I also do piano and I've written Trinity exams.
Mhm.
So what I'm doing right now is I'm teaching kids in my community piano and I'm actually charging money for it. And that
Mm.
money is now being used, once I make enough, obviously, I'll be donating that to a music center nearby.
Mm.
So that combines an aspect of economics and finance with something that I'm passionate about, piano.
Mm.
Because what I've been told is that just saying I'm doing piano doesn't really add a lot because I want to go into economics, finance, business, and piano
Mhm.
doesn't really have much of a connection with that right now, at least. So this forces it to have a connection. Is that what you're talking about when you say combining two things?
Yeah, love it. I think that's a good example. We've got the economics aspect, we've got the service aspect, and this is like at a later stage. But again, then what is important to do is in your essays or in your extracurricular descriptions, it's important for that to come through. That like this is not just piano, this is also economics and finance, this is also service. That coming through in the essays and the extracurricular descriptions, that is what like really make it. What every college wants to see is like, okay, maybe they're like kind of interested in like cool, okay, Shreya is a good football player, but it's more about like what has that taught Shreya like on a next level? Like has that made her a good leader or a good team player or like resilient, someone who can handle failure and come back? That's what they care about because that applies beyond just football. Tomorrow, when you're struggling in school, that is the resilience and leadership which will come through, which you picked up through football, which then gets applied to like let's say struggling with exams or academics there. Um,
You
that's
know,
what I
I
would.
have one question that's sort of off topic, but when you say you learn something through an experience, it's very hard to show a college tangible evidence that I've learned
Hmm.
something like this. How do you show them you evolve? Now, everyone will put it on paper. Everyone I know, whether it's scam or true, they'll put it on paper somewhere. So don't you think there's a lot of competitiveness and you don't it's so hard for colleges to distinguish between what's real and fake just solely on an essay. How do you actually improve your chances? Because I've actually done all this and other people have not. But a
Hmm.
college doesn't know that because we both said the same things on our essays. How does that like you understand what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying. There's some questions for which I don't have like very satisfying answers, and this is probably one of them. Very difficult question. Two things which might be helpful, and every college like has a different application process. I'm more well versed with Minerva, but like for Minerva specifically, for each extracurricular, they also wanted a contact person or a letter of recommendation. Even if it was, let's say, me being a football player, which I'm not a great football player, like a letter of recommendation or like evidence of that. If if that applies to your college, letters of recommendation are always a great way for that to come through. So let's say like the college wants a letter of recommendation from your football coach. He can actually be talking about the leadership and the resilience, and hearing that from like a different person has some credibility. And two is, I think, going one level beyond. So maybe there are people who play football, who have taught it to like underprivileged kids. Let's say you're like, and this is a hypothetical, but let's say you're super passionate about this and you take this one level above and you actually start like an organization, an NGO, and you have like volunteers who come in and you go to like these kids regularly for years at a stretch and you go and teach them like weekly and then you scale up and this continues after you go to college. That obviously comes like tangibly you have something which can say football and leadership and organization. So that is probably not applicable to all your extracurriculars, but one or two of them which you really want to like go deep on, that is what you can do is like having tangible, creating a website, creating an organization, creating content always, like adding, let's say like Shreya is doing like blogs every month, football, teaching underprivileged kids. She's adding like images and videos of herself. Maybe someone who's faking that doesn't have that evidence.
Yeah, yeah.
That's just me thinking off the top of my head. There.
That's good thinking. Thank you.
Yeah. Piano specifically is like an interesting example because I think piano is something where if you're super passionate, you can go from just like, let's say, being a student who has done Trinity grade 8 to like creation. And so let's say you're very, very passionate about, and this could be any sort of art form. I'm pushing my brother to do this. He's also, I think, doing piano graded right now. He's like, start creating, like make music. I don't know ABC of how that works, but like showing a college that like you have created music after doing your graded is so much more impactful than just like being the student who has played pieces which someone else wrote. So like if you can create, if you can record, put it up on YouTube, that is called like taking the extracurricular to the next level. Um, and I guess the very last thing I'll say about extracurriculars is like, don't force things. Like if you're doing something just because it looks good on a college app, one, it's not super authentic. It comes through like these are people who go through hundreds of applications a day. Like they will see through the basic, very high level bad lies which you're telling. And two is you'll only be able to like sustain effort and passion for something you're genuinely passionate about. And so whatever, like let it be piano. This is again all US specific because the US cares like the most about extracurriculars. Whatever it is, like piano or athletics, get to a very, very good level in what you're passionate about, and that will come through on the essays and on the extracurriculars and time commitment wise. A big pro tip is like the more you can sustain things, um, and have like numbers talk for themselves. So like the more podcast episodes you can do, the more you can sustain it without like just let's say doing 10 episodes and dropping off. Then that becomes a solid extracurricular because they see you put in time, effort, hours into this. You have something tangible. That's why I said in the beginning like depth over breadth. So maybe like an amazing profile. Like let's say I think mine is like not amazing, but a decent profile. Maybe I have like 8, 10 extracurriculars, but 3 or 4 of them I've gone very, very deep. The others are like okay, those are like on the side complementing, but 3 or 4 I've gotten deep. So kind of becomes like a T shape. So you have breadth here and you have length here, but like neither of those can be missing.
Right.
So, going off topic from extracurriculars, something that I'm seeing around this time is all my older friends and seniors are going into college now. They're starting their first year. Can you tell us a bit of how the switch from 12th grade or the transition from 12th grade to your first year of college is? Because I'll give you a personal example of mine. The first time I visited a college on an actual tour was my ninth grade summer. So I went to Duke University and I was very childish about the way that I thought about college. So I thought it would be like school. So I expected one main building that everything would go on in, and there's like dorms for students. But when I got there, I realized that this is basically like a small city, and it's so much larger than you actually realize it
Yeah.
is. You get what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish someone had a good answer for me when I was in 12th. Again, I'll preface by saying that Minerva is very different from your traditional university. So I'll speak to like Minerva. Maybe some of it is more generalizable to like a US university, but I might not go beyond that. Um, there's a lot of differences. No more spoon feeding. Like tomorrow, if you're doing bad in class, or you're not doing your IA, or you're not doing your extended essay or your TOK, the teacher will come, they will like tell you, they might even scold you. College, no one cares. Like you show up to class, you don't show up to class, don't care. You submit the assignment, or you don't submit the assignment, don't care. So the earlier you can inculcate the habit of good self motivation, good self discipline, good self study practices, that will really serve you in college. Because I could spend, and I have friends who have done this. I could spend a week in college skipping all my classes, doing nothing, like lying in bed all day playing video games. Even parents are like in a different country, so they don't have as much influence. But discipline is probably a very, very important thing, which like if you can have it as a high schooler, the transition will be easier to college. If you don't have it in high school, okay, but the transition will just be harder for you to college. If you want to like get something out of that experience. That's number one. Number two is specific and US specific, but a lot of things which were so important in school become like irrelevant in college. Two specific things are coming to mind right now. One is grades. Like we don't talk about like, okay, I scored this much in my SAT, I scored this much in like my IB, blah, blah, blah. It becomes all about like projects and the work you've done. So like how in school you're like everyone is like asking you about what's your PG and like this is mine, and you're comparing with your friends. That all becomes like irrelevant in college. And number two, maybe this is Minerva specific. I have a feeling it's not, is especially in Indus. to have kids who are generally like higher socioeconomic status wise. And so you compare in terms of, let's say you're going out, you compare in terms of like the brand someone is wearing, or you talk about like, okay, my dad makes this much money and he does this job. In college, I think that becomes much less important because I study with my roommate is like incredibly rich. He has like two successful startup. He pays the entire college fee himself. And like he's financially independent at 22. So he's high up. I may be in the middle. And there are students in college who come from very, very, very humble backgrounds, like from a rural like town or village in like Nigeria or Bangladesh, or like Brazil. And they're here. But my roommate versus like the person who's all the way down below, they honestly don't care. Like they will chat and they will hang out and they will go for lunch, and my roommate won't will be very sensitive to the fact that like maybe this person doesn't have like branded things or like isn't as willing to spend. So that is probably a big difference. Is in college you learn to be more sensitive to um, people's socioeconomic status. And that is an important skill to develop. I think that makes you very well socially aware. That tomorrow, when I'm asking someone for lunch, based on who the person is, I will choose like a more expensive or a less expensive restaurant. Those kind of important decisions. Um, that's number two. That was kind of a ramble, but I think that's a very interesting aspect of college. I was never prepared for back in India. I was talking to everyone who was like either as wealthy or like significantly more wealthy than me. I think number three is, and this is also like this part culture, this is part college versus high school, is people don't really care about like I am the son of like a Hyderabadi politician or a Hyderabadi millionaire, and this is what my parents do, and this is my family name. Like no one cares. Like who are you as a person? And so maybe here in school you end up getting opportunities through your parents or through a connection. In college, it's more like you're expected to go and see that out for yourself. Like you're your own person. You are less so your father's like daughter or your mother's daughter, as you are like your own person. And so college is the time where it's like stepping out of the shadow of your parents and like creating your own identity outside of like your family's whatever like social status or like their recognition in society. Three big things.
So until now, we haven't really touched upon the cultural or the soft skills aspect of moving from high school to college. So I think one aspect that I'd like to ask you now is in India, the way we experience school and the way that we socially look at school and how much pressure we experience from the people around us, I think it's different from the rest of the world. I'm sure that there's some similarities, but definitely some differences. And I feel like this is a really important question to ask you now that I'm thinking about it, because you said that Minerva lets you go to 6 different cities, right? So you get to experience how college is like in 6 different cities. So in the 2 cities that you've seen so far, San Francisco and Thailand, right? Um,
Taipei.
Taipei. Have you noticed any differences, any similarities, anything that you think you should warn us or tell us about?
So I feel like there's two aspects to this. One aspect is like settling down in a new place, in a new culture. And aspect two is like studying with people from like, okay, 50 different countries and cultures. There's two aspects. I guess I can talk through them one by one, though they're very interrelated. Settling into a new culture is very, very interesting and you learn a ton. And so for some people, that could be as simple as like moving to a new city in India, if that is where they're going to college. For someone like me, I had been to the US, but I'd never been to the West Coast. And just settling in such a different environment, that is where the soft skills come in and you learn so much. And I've talked through some of those learnings on the podcast. Um, but so the learnings themselves will be different depending on the place you go to. So I don't want to like specifically talk about San Francisco because I'm sure people will be all over the world. What I can talk about a bit is like, how do you adjust to that culture? And so a couple of things. As much as possible, like make use of your local friends and talk everything through with them. Like I have local friends here in Taiwan who I talk things through with. Like basic cultural things. Like I feel like people were staring at me on the metro today. And I was like, why is that? And then my friend was like, you were talking to your mom and you were talking way too loud. And I was like, okay, interesting. The metros here are very silent. That's why they were staring at me. Um, so talking to local friends, or whatever that is, if that's YouTube or if that's talking to someone in your college, about do's and don'ts of the culture. Because it's good to make mistakes, but you'd rather not make like very embarrassing mistakes, which sort of make you feel very awkward in the moment. So like communication is important, being very, very observant, like being having your five senses open as to like what is the culture here, what do people do, what do people not do, what seems to be different, and always observe and always ask if you're confused. That is what I'll say there. In terms of the other aspect of interacting with kids from all over, that's probably the number one learning I have in college. Like second might be what I'm learning academically in classes, like my whatever, my economics and psychology and English classes. My number one learning from college is my peers, like who I'm going to university with. I could potentially learn the same economics or psychology at a Harvard or at Minerva or at in India or on YouTube. That the medium to me is less important. It's about who I'm going to college with. Um, Biggest piece of advice here is to take the time to get to know your classmates and don't get stuck with in school we do this. I am guilty of doing this, getting stuck with the same five six people and spending the entire IBDP with like that close gang of friends and not really talking to like others in your grade unless you're like this super social extroverted person. In college, I have my close gang of friends, but I'm making so much effort to get to know every single one of my classmates because specifically my class is very small. But like as many of them as you can, like take people out for coffee chats, take people out for a walk, um, take people out for a day of exploration or a movie or whatever. Talk to them, like pick their brain. What's your background? Why are you coming to this college? Where do you see yourself going? Um, the people who like you might not even have said hi to over the course of the semester might end up becoming your best friend after that one lunch. So in college, the biggest piece of advice is like expand the net and expand the social network. Don't get stuck with the same few people, which will probably be like just speaking from personal experience, there might probably be like at least half of your close gang might be like Indians or people who are like at least similar in terms of worldview and belief systems. Go and talk to people who have a different worldview than you. Go and talk to people who you disagree with and like they disagree with you. That'll be the most impactful conversations. That was a tangent. Sorry, I'll get back to like cultural awareness. I think a lot of what I said in terms of the place applies to the people. And so being very culturally aware, like here, I've made we have Indians and Pakistanis at my university, and we're actually surprisingly very, very good friends. But both sides have sometimes made geopolitical jokes that like make the other side a bit uncomfortable or a bit angry. Being very, very sensitive to that. When you talk about someone else's country or culture, being very, very respectful and polite, always asking, clarifying, not making assumptions. Our media, especially for certain cultures like Pakistan, China, whatever, is like super biased. And this I'm telling you after interacting with like Pakistanis and having a Chinese roommate. So biased, and there's so many stereotypes. Like all take the time to actually clarify all of that. Um, and building cultural awareness is one of the best things you'll do in college because I'm assuming for the people who are ambitious, who want to like maybe work in an MNC in India or want to work outside of India, you probably won't be working with like just Indians or Indian Americans. You will be working with like some guy from Finland and some guy from China and some guy from like New Zealand. Being culturally aware will help you build relationships with those people. Like people do business different. And this is what I'm learning doing like projects in different cities. Like people do business very differently in SF versus in Taiwan. In SF, maybe it's more professional. In Taiwan, it's common to like go and have boba, bubble tea, or like a meal with your colleagues. Those are like the cultural differences. I'm able to experience that through working, like living in different cities. For someone who's in one city, you will experience that with your classmates, but like building high levels of cultural awareness and experience, making a note of what you're learning. Like I know this now about Pakistani people and how they work. I know this now about American working culture. That will be a big like head start when you get into the world of work. So I know that was a very, very long answer. But like hopefully some of that is like valuable.
No, it was really helpful.
Thank you for that last piece of information. I think that was super helpful, even among other things. We've talked about a lot of interesting stuff today. Is there anything you want to reiterate or emphasize on, or something new you would like to add before we conclude?
I had a very interesting conversation with someone on my podcast. It's 2.5 hour long episode. Um, he went to University of Toronto. He was studying like CS and math, dropped out after a year, and is now like wealthy and successful and building startups in San Francisco. And he is like 25 years old, I think. And most of his friends have like just graduated college and are doing like their normal basic jobs, and like they're going to rise in their career step by step by step, versus he is already insanely successful and intelligent and has an amazing network. And so there's two things I'll say. One is try to have exponential growth versus like linear growth. And whatever that looks like for you. Linear growth is sort of, okay, good grades in school, good college, good basic job, better job, better job, better job, promotions, blah, blah, blah. How can you like fast track that linear growth and make it more exponential? Like, how can you skip one or two phases of that? How can you immediately go from like a base job to like a senior management role? Things along those lines. I don't have answers, but like try and start thinking along those lines. Um, if you follow the linear path of growth, most people will have like their success in terms of their career at like 40 maybe. If you want to have that earlier, if you want to have that at 25, 30, 35, you can't be taking like the conventional linear route that everyone is doing. Because what you realize in college is there will be people who are getting better grades than you, who are better programmers than you, who are getting better internships than you. And so for me, it's about like, I don't want to run the rat race, which like everyone is running. I want to like be different. I want to run my own race, have a specific niche. Like no one else at Minerva should be working on the things I'm working on. I should have these very specific niches and I should be known for something. Like at Minerva, I'm known as the guy who like does podcasting, has written and published books, and like writes a monthly newsletter about Minerva. It's been about a year of newsletters now. That's what I'm known for. Everyone at Minerva is trying to create those niches, even if that's like, we have like a lot of like CS majors and tech people, but everyone in that is trying to create their own niches versus everyone trying for like big tech software engineering. So like creating those niches. And I guess a complementary thought to that is this was told to me actually by a Harvard student who I got on the podcast. And I was so excited for the conversation because I was like, we're going to talk about how to get into Harvard and all the amazing things about Harvard. And I think very early on in the conversation, she was like, it's not about Harvard. Like, it's not about me going to Harvard. I'm so much more than a Harvard student. And unfortunately, when people talk to me, they just think of me as like this Harvard student, as like that name on my resume. I'm so much more than that. And so every one of you, like listeners, is like so much more than the college you're going to. And it's not so much the name of the university you're going to, which will just be like one line in your resume and one sentence which you're going to say to people. It's about the people, it's about the things you do at that university. It's not like you get into Harvard and then like sleep for the rest of your life. And that applies to Minerva and every other university in the world. Everyone is like working hard. So do your best, try and get into the best university possible. If not, if you get into like a university which is maybe your B or C choice, that's okay. That happened for a reason. Now what? Like now build interesting projects and do cool stuff at that university. And opportunities will come. Harvard students maybe have opportunities thrown at them. Maybe you'll have to like go and proactively seek those opportunities, but the opportunities are available to everyone, especially if you're in the US. Again, US specific. But yeah, I think that's a good one sentence which even the Harvard student told me. Like, it's not about the school you go to. What are you doing at the school you're going to, regardless of the name? So like we care so much about the name and the prestige, and that becomes what your parents will like. This is very brutally honest. Like your parents tomorrow will be like, yes, like Sanyogita goes to like UC Berkeley, or like Shreya goes to like NYU, and then everyone will be like proud. But it's less about that. That's maybe fancy for like the first 3 days. And then it's like, okay, like back to work. Regardless of the name, what am I here at university for? What am I going to do? Those are the final thoughts.
I wish we could talk for like 10 hours because it honestly seems like you have so many interesting and unique things to say. But unfortunately, that wraps up our conversation today with you, Arya Dharod. We've explored the fascinating and actually truly captivating journey of your background as a well rounded, brilliant, and unique student. This is purely to our listeners. Whether you're aspiring to become an econ or psych major like Arya already are, or simply curious about what you want to do, I hope you've taken away some valuable lessons and maybe a bit of motivation to push the boundaries of what's possible. Thank you so much, Arya, for sharing your time and wisdom with us today. It's been a pleasure having you on the first episode of our podcast, Indus Eagle Alumni.